Well, hello, I'm Chad Kleinens, President and CEO of Zweig Group, and welcome to the kickoff of the 2020 Elevate AEC experience and the ElevateHer symposium. To establish why I'm here, I'm going to start off with a story that goes back to the year I graduated engineering school. It was 23 years ago when I attended my first U2 concert at the TWA Dome in St. Louis, Missouri. Doesn't seem like that long ago, but the TWA era of flying certainly does, as does the ability to pack 50,000 people into an arena. On that night, I was captivated by a band that had a greater purpose than just making music. Since the early 80s, the members of U2 as a band and individually have collaborated with other musicians, artists, celebrities, and politicians to address issues concerning poverty, disease, and human rights. Their focus on finding purpose in their music has been inspiring to me, and combined with my engineering career and passion to advance AEC was partial inspiration behind our Elevate the Industry mission. Beyond the important services we provide, it's about what we can do to advance this profession and fight the issues that hold us back. I now consider this event, Elevate AEC, the annual gathering of people of the movement to elevate this industry. It's evolved far beyond a conference. Fueled by a purpose, we are here to network with fellow AEC leaders, learn new strategies and tactics for elevating our careers and our firms, and to celebrate the 2020 Zweig Group award-winning individuals, firms, and this amazing industry we've dedicated our lives to. And what an amazing industry we serve, the industry that plans, designs, and constructs the backbone of society, the designers of our way of life. The new generations of workforce are looking for purpose in their work, and we've got it in AEC big time. So why do we have such a significant recruiting and retention challenge? Part of it is because, let's face it, we're slow to change. The reality is that as an industry, we've been satisfied with the pace of our evolution while we've significantly lagged other industries in measures of workplace advancements like diversity, flexibility, and information technology. Driving awareness and progress in those areas is important to our mission to elevate the industry, similarly to how U2 uses their music to drive awareness and action. So as we look at what it takes to elevate the industry, we've got two parts of an equation, performance and purpose. On the performance side, we must perform as well as we possibly can as an industry to give us the maximum resources to be competitive. And on the purpose side, it's about working together to advance the deeper things that attract and retain talent in this industry, the things that guide career decisions, influence behavior, shape goals, offer a sense of direction, and overall create meaning. Today, we'll talk about both sides of the equation, and I'll start on the performance side. To empower industry performance is Zweig Group's brand heritage and the core of who we are. Everything we do is to drive business success and financial performance for AEC firms. When we operate smarter and more efficiently as an industry, we are more competitive in the global race for talent. As we examine the performance side, one thing is very clear. It's a beautiful day to work in AEC. According to the data, there's never been a better time to be in AEC. We came into the year with the strongest industry metrics on record. And although COVID quickly affected some parts of our business overnight, and that data was quick to react, financially, the industry as a whole is doing very well. To paint a picture, I'm going to share information from our recent industry research with an emphasis on the vast amount of data we get from our awards programs, totaling over 2 million data points annually. We'll start by looking at a critical measure of industry performance, profit. Industry-wide median profit set another record at 15% in our most recent financial performance survey. That 15% figure actually matches what we've historically considered high profit firms, a special outlier of the highest performing firms. With the median growing so much, we may need to redefine what high performance is. COVID could, however, possibly correct that. Looking at another profitability metric, there's never been a better time to be an owner in an AEC firm. Historic highs on return on equity continue to climb as shown on this graph. This is one of the most important profitability metrics as it reveals how much profit firms earned in comparison to the total amount of shareholder equity found on the balance sheet. The higher the ROE, the more easily firms are able to raise money for growth. Backlog has also grown steadily since 2012, although 2020 showed a little bit of cooling off. It'll be interesting to see how COVID affects these numbers this year. Now, with all of the great performance metrics comes challenges in managing a growing firm. Firm leaders report these top 5 challenges. Number 1, staff recruiting and retention, now for, I believe it's 3 years in a row. Business development and marketing, number 2. Ownership transition, always a big concern. Communication and time management, new to the list. And then also business strategic planning. Now, despite these challenges, some being a byproduct of the success that we are enjoying, things are going very well overall. Many other metrics paint a beautiful picture of an industry operating at historic levels. So I'll shift to 3 special data sets of our award-winning firms to give us a look at the firms that are growing the fastest, providing the best places to work, and leading in marketing and brand. Now, Zweig Group decades of research shows marketing is one of the top 3 investments you can make to drive growth and culture in an AEC firm. So we'll start with our Marketing Excellence Awards data. These 2 pie charts show 2 sample sets. The first is how many firms were fast growth among the 2020 Marketing Excellence Award winners, abbreviated as MEA. And the second is all other firms. Now, fast growth is defined as firms that grew 20% or more over the past 3 years. 45% of MEA winners were fast growth versus 29% of the overall sample set, so 50% more. Reinforcing marketing really does drive growth. According to our data, marketing also drives profit, and the results here help make a strong case for return on marketing investment. 67% of MEA winners were highly profitable, which means they maintained a 15% or higher profit margin for 3 or more years versus 59% of all of the firms. Again, more evidence that marketing investment drives overall firm performance. So marketing fuels growth, and we can say the next group of award winners are at the top of their game. The hot firm list, the fastest growing AEC firms in North America. We've had strong growth in 3-year revenues of hot firms since 2016. This chart represents the first half of the hot firm equation, showing the average 3-year growth in gross revenue dollars of the 2020 hot firm list. Now, the second half of the hot firm equation is shown on this graph, showing the 3-year percentage growth of hot firms on the hot firm list, with the average being 81%. Now, for comparison purposes, we show the top 10 hot firms and the average growth of all other firms to demonstrate the dramatic differences here. This next chart shows the way the 2020 hot firm list grew during the previous 3 years compared to the top 10. Now, note the significant difference with 8 out of 10 of the top 10 using M&A as their growth strategy. Want to move to the top of the list? Talk to Jamie Claire Kaiser, Director of Advisory at Zweig Group. The next chart shows hot firms are also more efficient with their people, shown by the difference in gross revenue per FTE or full-time employee of hot firms versus all of the firms. And finally, looking at job creation, hot firms added 100 people on average over the past 3 years. Overall, another good year for the hot firm winners. Now, moving on to the final and largest data set of our 3 awards programs, Best Firms to Work For. This is the largest employee survey in the AEC industry with over 12,000 responses yielding a wealth of data. It's 1.7 million data points. Still, the #1 benefit ranked by AEC firms, training and development. This is an important tool, obviously, in the recruiting and retention challenge. But looking at where firms rank where employees rank their firms the highest, these 3 things. My firm strives to improve. I feel my firm is ethical in its business practices, and my firm provides high quality work for their clients. Now, this is where employees rank their firms the lowest. Frequency of raises and bonuses, compensation for extraordinary effort, and employees' subpar work is addressed. Now, number 3 is very interesting, as this is a growing issue for a lot of firms. We're seeing this in many data sets and hearing it a lot more in conversations around what is holding the firm back. Do not allow underperformers to affect your entire team. They must be confronted and either reformed or removed. Now, looking at generational differences, we divided the best firms data into 2 age groups, 18 to 45 and 45 and older. The data indicates striking gaps between these 2 groups, and the first graphic here shows where the younger age group is least satisfied and the older is most satisfied on these specific items. None of this is surprising, but it should remind management that they too were probably concerned about these issues when they were younger, and they should focus their resources here as a retention strategy. Now, on the flip side, it gets even more interesting when we reverse the perspective and look at where the younger group rated firms highest compared to where the older group rated their firms lowest. Number one, of course, highlights an important feature of the best firms to work for, opportunities for career advancement. And I love it because it makes the case for growth. Number two is also important as it highlights something that can often get off track in firms. Younger staff really do care about their reviews. So management should take them seriously. Many firms are having a problem with this right now. Why? Well, in many cases, leaders are busy and reviews often don't get the priority needed. This can be a major demotivator to your people, as staff development is the most important issue among surveyed staff. Number three is related to number one, reinforcing the importance of training and development. Keeping your stars depends on it. Number four is especially interesting to me, and I'm glad to see it. Younger employees see opportunities for financial gain, but this is not good, while older employees rated this much lower this year. Could it be the stress of the pandemic and what it might do to firm valuations cause this? I don't know. Our valuation expert, Tracy Eves, will be talking more about how COVID could affect firm valuations in our M&A Next symposium kicking off in week 4 of the premium experience on October 22nd. She has some real fascinating insight here that you'll not miss. And then number 5 is almost comical. I guess younger employees seem to be getting along better than the older ones. Next, we separated the data from males and females, noting the top 10 areas where scores are most divergent. Parental leave, amount of paid time off, and being comfortable agreeing with or disagreeing with and constructively criticizing my superiors were all rated high by males and low by females. But here's what's interesting. Effectiveness of your team working from home and your effectiveness working from home were rated high by females and low by males. Now think about that for a moment. Here, females clearly believe working from home works well, and the data does support it, whereas males say it's not as working well for them. So if males hold the majority of leadership positions that decide these remote work policies, which is still the case in AEC, or at least in many firms, it starts to make sense why we've done so poorly in this area compared to other industries. Fortunately, we've got a solution for this, and it's coming up later today. Now, looking at the areas trending up the most in the employee data significantly over the past 3 years: effective communication, firm-wide financial information, ethical business practices, and telecommuting, showing the sharpest rise in 2020, likely influenced by post-COVID scores. Now, looking at the areas that have been trending down over the past 3 years: satisfaction with work experience, and I think it's because a lot of firms are busy; fairness and consistency in policies and decisions; management showing compassion in times of need; and then down sharply, job security, certainly influenced by post-COVID scores. Collecting over 1,000 data points per day, this program had the most dramatic shift when COVID hit. Like a sonic boom, most employees of AEC firms were working from home with only days to prepare, and the data showed it. As quickly, the reigning year after year champion of AEC staff challenges, or things they're least satisfied with, communication, was replaced by work-life balance, followed by distractions and loneliness, not even on the spectrum last year. Now, looking where the data shifted the most post-COVID versus pre-COVID, here is where those scores plummeted. I feel my job is secure without the threat of a downsizing event in the coming year. Quality of raises and bonuses and benefits. My firm's management shows compassion to employees in times of need. Now, here is where the scores soared post-COVID. Telecommuting, I feel things are effectively communicated at my firm, and mentoring program. Interesting that communication and mentoring both soared in the work from home environment. Could it be that we finally broke free from the boring office meetings and now there's more one-on-one communication with people, picking up the phones and actually talking to each other? I don't know, but it's great to see that. Now, zooming back out, it'll be a while before we have 2020 industry numbers to compare to the historic metrics I cited earlier. For now, we know COVID has dramatically affected our lives and how we work, as the data from the employees through the Best Firms to Work For contest was quick to show. As far as where the industry metrics fall by the end of the year is best indicated by the most recent data we collected in just the past several weeks related to AEC firms' responses to COVID. Now, Christy is going to share some of this COVID data in her ElevateHer talk following this keynote. And tomorrow, I'll be doing a state of the industry deeper dive where I will look at some additional award winner data along with our latest COVID data. I'll also provide a tutorial for navigating this massive Elevate AEC 8-week experience. So, summing up the performance side, we've never been stronger as an industry. We see it in the numbers. Even in COVID, we are doing far better than our friends in the retail, restaurant, and hospitality industry, at least so far. But pre-COVID, we were still behind in those areas I cited earlier: diversity, flexibility, and IT. Okay, so to compete globally for talent, we must be more competitive in those areas and others. So in addition to being incredibly successful as we are financially, we must make progress in these areas of greater purpose. That's why I've always been a big fan and admired U2. As a band, they were not satisfied with being one of the greatest bands of all time. They used their platform to advance causes of a higher purpose. We too should use our success to fuel advancements in the areas that we lag. Thanks to COVID, we've been forced into rapid progress in both IT and flexibility. What is happening in some areas of the business could be considered quantum evolution, which happens when, on very rare occasions, evolution proceeds very rapidly. As such, this is a challenging time that provides tremendous opportunity to make advancements, rapid advancements in the things that will elevate the industry and make us more competitive in the global economy. I challenge you as a leader to focus on the activities that will enable you to make greater progress on those and other advancements beyond what COVID is forcing. Embrace the quantum evolution. Push yourself even further out of your comfort zone. Now, flexibility is an area where we've lagged significantly. As the restrictions of COVID dissipate, which we hope they do very soon, we're going to have to fight the tendency to go back to the way things were. The flexibility that's being forced is good and it's working well, according to the data. This level of flexibility will help us in both recruiting and retention as an industry. We'll never go back to the way things were, and we need to embrace that. So going forward, the award-winning firms of the future will be made up of heroes at home, not just at work. To empower this industry to be all it can be, we must solve the recruiting and retention challenge. Making advancements in diversity is key to solving this. Bono said it well in his famous Rolling Stone interview on gender inequality. He said, "We can't solve these problems at half strength," which is the way we've been operating for a few millennia now. So as the quantum evolution is happening in many AEC firms in the areas of flexibility and IT that was forced by COVID, today we'll drive quantum evolution in diversity and inclusion with the inaugural ElevateHer symposium. Through the investment of dedicated firms and individuals, the symposium portion of Elevate will present tangible strategies and tactics for advancing diversity in your teams, your firms, and ultimately the industry. Now, we're not just here for another conference, but to make a quantum leap in things that need to change in order to meet the demands of our future world. We're here to write the lyrics for the song of our future, a song where performance continues to soar as we make quantum leaps in purpose. Now, bands like U2 have many big hits, but there's always that one big smash hit that redefines the band and changes music. Songs that evoke a feeling, songs that evoke a movement, songs that evoke a place. Now, I consider Where the Streets Have No Name as U2's clear #1 smash hit. It has evoked all three of those things. Plenty of music critics would agree with me. Half of the Joshua Tree sessions were spent on it, turning out the best opening track of an album of all time. But what's really special about this song is that they put aside the sound the band was known for and risked the entire album on the impact of this one song. This unbelievable gamble they took resulted in an incredible payoff. But smash hits aren't just for bands. AEC firms also have a big smash hit at some point in their lives. What is yours? I'm wondering right now, what is Zweig Group's #1 smash hit? We've got a long history with some big hits, but I believe our #1 smash hit is ahead, which is exciting. Maybe happening today. So now it's time to kick off our biggest connecting event, Elevate AEC. The mission of Elevate AEC to elevate the industry continues today as we begin an 8-week journey, sharing knowledge and connecting through purpose. I want to start by thanking all of our sponsors who, along with you, made this event possible. SES ESOP Strategies, Wintrust, Uninet, Actions Prove, AEC Business Solutions, Core Consultants, On Strategy, Workfolio, IMA, and Client Savvy. All of these sponsors are offering powerful expertise throughout the 8-week experience. We'll talk more about their sessions in tomorrow's State of the Industry Deep Dive at 11 a.m. Central. You can also check out the schedule on our website to find out more. There's something for everyone. and many of the sessions are free. Special thanks goes to our platinum sponsor, CTA, Corporate Tax Advisors. They help AEC firms earn tax credits earmarked for design firms. Most firms in this virtual room can benefit from this incentive, and the rewards go straight to your bottom line, giving you more dollars to invest in your people and growth. I'm working with several firms right now who have recently completed the process with CTA, and they're blown away with the results, wondering why they didn't do it sooner. You can learn more by tuning into their session titled Research and Design Tax Credit for Common Mistakes, Interpreting Its Merits on Monday, November 9th at 11 a.m. Central. Again, another free session you won't want to miss. So as we get started, the Elevate AEC experience we launched today certainly is different from years past, but make no mistake, we've worked hard to maintain the pillars of the event, which are to network, learn, and celebrate. We miss seeing all of you in person and look forward to that day returning. For now, we'll continue the mission to elevate our firms through this experience, and I'm delighted that you are all here. As we kick off our event, I want to extend a special welcome to all of our 2020 award-winning firms and individuals. We won't be packing 500 people into a ballroom with lights and music for our traditional awards gala, but we will celebrate our winners throughout the next 8 weeks. So let's get started writing our next song, going for the big smash hit that takes our firms to a new level. Our 8-week concert starts now to drive performance and purpose individually in our firms and collectively in this awesome industry. And now it is certainly a privilege and an honor to welcome to the virtual stage our headline keynote address by Gabrielle Bullock, Director of Global Diversity of Perkins and Will, and Phil Harrison, CEO of Perkins and Will. Well, where they will present social disruptions and AEC industry transformation through JEDI. Probably the coolest title of any talk I've ever heard. Gabrielle and Phil, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Chad. Good morning, everybody. Hi, Phil.
Hey, Gabrielle.
I'm going to introduce Phil, and then he's going to introduce me, and then we'll explain how this is all going to go. So Phil Harrison is an architect, our CEO at Perkins and Will. He grew up in Rockland County in New York, Southern New York State. He has a BA in philosophy, in philosophy, visual arts, and a master's of architecture, all from Harvard. After college, Phil traveled to West Africa for a year before pursuing an art career and teaching. He shifted to architecture from art, started working with the Atlanta-based healthcare firm Next Man, which joined Perkins and Will in 1995. So Phil and I have been with the firm a long time. Phil has held various positions, led the Atlanta office, president of Perkins and Will, then became the CEO in 2006. Phil lives in Atlanta, Georgia, and in part because he believes that it's one of the most progressive cities in the world when it comes to racial justice. And since this whole theme about music, I like that. So Phil sings and plays a couple of instruments, and we've actually heard him sing. He's not so bad. So welcome, Phil.
Thank you, Gabrielle. And here I am in Atlanta today. This is the National Center for Civil and Human Rights in this city. And I'm sitting in Atlanta today, and Gabrielle's in Los Angeles. And as Gabrielle said, we've known each other a long time. This is going to be sort of a conversation between the two of us, as you can tell. So it'll be sort of a back and forth. And Gabrielle and I actually have, even though she's on the West Coast and I'm on the East Coast, and there's other differences between us, which are obvious, that we've got a lot in common. So we're both architects. Gabrielle's an architect, of course. She grew up right across the river from where I grew up in Riverdale, which is the Bronx, northern Bronx. Went to RISD, where was one of the first graduates of its new architecture program in the mid 80s. And interestingly, was in a sort of a creative art school that then went into architecture, which is similar to my background. And creativity is going to be really important in our conversation today, because when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, justice and equity, JEDI, you have to think about what motivates those, your movement. And for our firm is centered in the realm of creativity, and creativity is a fundamental driver to why, the big why we want to move. So anyway, both of us sort of come from a background in creativity. Gabrielle's early career was in focusing on reimagining low-income public housing for communities of color. And however, the recession in the 80s pushed her to go work for a big firm and got into working in healthcare, which is more or less what happened to me. I thought I was going to build furniture. It didn't work out. I started designing hospitals instead, and we both have that in common. Gabrielle's went to a firm, Russo and Saunders, that was also acquired by Perkins and Will in the early 90s, similar to my firm. And like me, she's had a number of positions in the firm. She led some of the firm's most significant projects as a project manager. She was managing director of our Los Angeles studio for a number of years. She led our firm-wide project management initiative, and it was in 2013, 7 years ago, that she took on her current role, which is Global Director of Diversity and Inclusion. Spends about half of her time in that role and the other half still working on projects, but then she spends, I guess, the other half for a total of 150%, I guess, to do things like be the IIDA president 2 years ago, and a number of task forces around our industry around equity, diversity, and inclusion. As I said, she lives in Los Angeles now. There she is in front of a project that Gabrielle is involved with our LA studio, Destination Crenshaw, which is a fascinating project. Maybe that'll come up. And Gabrielle this year is the winner of the Whitney Young Award, which is a fantastic accomplishment. So enough about us. Let's get on to the subject.
Okay, so I'm going to set the stage for our conversation. So our industry and society are facing a convergence of crises, social disruptions that is unprecedented. The economic, the health, the environmental, the social and racial justice challenges have presented us with an opportunity, but also a responsibility to address them. So what will our response be? How will we elevate the industry by challenging the status quo and reimagining the future by looking through the JEDI lens, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion? So Phil and I will explore these ideas and perspectives in an interview format. So I'm going to ask him questions, he's going to ask me questions. I promise it'll be much more organized than last night's debate. If you have questions, put them in the chat. If you would like one of us specifically to answer a question, please let us know that also in the chat. We're going to have about 30 minutes, 40 minutes of interview and then open it up for Q&A. So let's start with looking at this convergence. And so Phil, this is for you. So we're going to look at how we've responded to the convergence of the social, health, economic, environmental crisis in the last 6 months. Sort of what's at stake, what's the state of affairs at Perkins and Will. So specifically to you, Phil, what is different than previous economic downturns, environmental, and other industry-wide challenges?
I think, and Chad actually alluded to this in his comments earlier about empathy and management empathy in firms. But to me, the biggest thing that's different now, as opposed to anything that I've experienced in my career, is that people are more emotionally impacted by the triple pandemics that we're experiencing around race and justice, around climate, and now around public health, around COVID. People are feeling deeply personally impacted, emotionally, levels of stress, level of personal impact are like no other time. And because of that, I think there's a bigger imperative for management and firms to be part of answering the forces that are driving these pandemics. Firms can't sit on the sidelines and be passive and say, hey, well, I can't do anything about that. I'm busy. I'm too busy just trying to stay in business, or that's too hard of a problem to take on. There is a burning platform for firms to have a specific and direct response to really all aspects of that are impacting our people. And of course, our people are our business. And falling short of that, we will let down our staff and we will lose sort of the primary driver of our success. But B, we will miss an opportunity today in this market to make change like no other. And so I believe, as hard as this time is and as difficult as change can be, we are in a sort of a change resistant industry. And now we have this opportunity to specifically address issues around the environment, around race and equity, and around other things that people are deeply passionate about. So to me, the biggest change, the unique characteristic is it's a much more highly tuned emotional time. So I'm going to ask you a question, Gabrielle, if I may. And what do you think, because you've been doing this now for 7 years, and not just at Perkins and Will, but you've done it for the IIDA, and you've lectured and spoken in a number of firms and forums and so forth. And what do you see as the biggest challenge in addressing and leading our firm or any firm towards equity, diversity, inclusion at this moment in time?
I think at this moment in time, it's not the diversity and the inclusion. Those concepts are widely understood. I think most firms understand the value of diversity and inclusion. I think what's come to light now is the real focus on justice and equity. Because if you lead with justice and equity, then you will achieve diversity and inclusion. So diversity and inclusion, could be considered checking the box. And so we clearly want to go beyond that. So I think during this time, the most difficult issue was how to talk about race, how to talk about racism. How does racism, systemic racism, show up in our work, our culture, our policies, and our practices? So learning to lead through the JEDI lens, we're starting it now with those difficult conversations. So, and to relate it back to how it impacts our work, and I think Destination Crenshaw is a perfect example about how diversity, justice, and how to build a culturally competent project with a community. So, short answer is the conversation around race and understanding why it's there, how it got there, and how it's still showing up, because most people would rather not talk about it because it's messy and uncomfortable. Okay, I got the baton again.
Yeah.
So that was about convergence. We're going to talk a little bit about how we can elevate and how we are motivated to change now. So Phil, Whitney Young called us to action in 1968 at the AIA convention for our thunderous silence. We haven't moved the needle very far in 52 years. Clearly, we are slow to move and change. We move to action with sustainability, with resiliency, with design excellence, and innovation. Why do you think we've not acted on equity, diversity, and inclusion so far, and why are you moved to act now?
That's a great question, because I think that's kind of the whole nut of this conversation is action and either doing something or doing nothing. And I really like the name Elevate for this from Zweig and the concept behind the term elevate, because I think the industry can and should and must do better. We've had a shifting perspective ourselves over the last decade or so. Our firm is 85 years old. And when we turned 75, we had a big party, which was great. It was fun to get everyone together at the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C. and celebrate. And I miss getting everyone together. But also during that time, in addition to looking back 75 years, we looked forward 25. We took a day during our big birthday party to say, when we turn 100, what should we expect of ourselves at that point in time? And we came up with, I think it was 9, and I won't remember all 9 of them because this was 10 years ago, but we came up with 9 future themes that we believe should define our firm when we turned 100. And one of those was diversity. So at that point in time, 10 years ago, we said, this is a serious problem. It's something we need to deal with. But by putting it out 25 years, we were saying to ourselves, this is sort of a macro problem that we'll have to deal with eventually. But we didn't say at that time, this is something we need to deal with right now with a sense of urgency. So being self-critical 10 years ago, this was sort of we saw the issue, but it was remote. It was in the distance. That changed 7 years ago, just sort of because a door opened and you were the door, Gabrielle. You raised your hand and said, we need to do something now. And I believe that every firm should find their door, their person who's just going to take the initiative. In our case, it was you. It was one person who said, let me start this, let me design an initiative, and let me execute the initiative. And that was our path. And that took us on a course. But even then, it was a gradual movement. A couple of 2 years ago, I guess it was, when Me Too hit, that was sort of the next sort of degree of sort of shifting of perspective. I think it in some ways caught the industry by surprise, or maybe ill prepared is a better way to put it. We all sort of understood that we had a historically male dominated industry, but I don't think we understood, or at least acknowledged to ourselves or publicly, the depth of impact of disproportional genders in the industry and how that impacted our women colleagues. And so that was sort of one more shift. And that led us to all of a sudden really begin to take things much more seriously. And then this year, with the issues around race that have just turned our country inside out, we've had to take that much more action on racial justice issues. I think it's hard because of the acknowledgement of the problem. I think if you define a problem as you sort of acknowledge it, but it's an abstraction, it's one thing. If you commit to action, you name it, you talk about it, you learn how to communicate about it, then you can actually do something. And I think your point about, and Chad said this, communication in firms is one of the most important success factors. We need to learn how to talk about difficult subjects to talk about. And at our firm, even after 7 years, we're just now, I believe, accomplishing being comfortable talking about race and gender and other issues related to the JEDI lens. So to me, it's possible to make progress once you've acknowledged the problem, once you've learned how to talk about it, and then you break it down into action, manageable actions that you can say, these are the 10 things or 3 things that we're actually going to do. And you commit to doing them, and then you do them. And that sounds really basic, but that's fundamentally different from where we started 10 years ago when we said in 25 years, we've got to deal with this problem. It's kind of like, I need to go, I got to do this chore in my house, but I never get around to doing it. I know, as opposed to, I have to do it right now. And this idea of a burning platform. So I think that all of us in our own ways need to figure out a way to acknowledge, communicate, and define manageable steps. So I'm going to ask you, is it my turn? Yes, it is.
Yep.
Okay, here we go. We've made changes and we're innovators. Here we are, designers. We shape the physical environments of the world. And we've taken on major innovations in order to do that, most notably around sustainability and environmental challenges, and then more broadly around resiliency. And so we've sort of proven an ability to adapt and change, and there's a sense of urgency around those things. How and why should our industry apply that same sense of urgency to about challenging the status quo around justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion?
Short answer is the people, humanity, right? And if you think of our people as our infrastructure, the pandemic really revealed the fragility of our social infrastructure by the disproportionate impact on people of color, on the essential workers, healthcare. So I think if we look at it, if any part of our society is broken, then society is broken. And so I see JEDI as integral to sustainability and resilience of the built environment and thereby society. I also think it applies to our profession and our industry, that if we're not moving and advancing and elevating toward JEDI, more equity, that we will ultimately be irrelevant and not of much help. So I think by challenging the status quo in every area, how we practice, how we design, how we build, and how we lead will allow us to break down those barriers and go beyond do no harm. I'd like to say that because we tend to stay in our lanes. We don't look at what the justice issue is or the equity issue is when we're designing our project or working with the community. And I think that's the pivotal part that has to change, to focus on that. So I think that's the urgency, is that our communities and our society depend on us.
And just a follow-up question, what would you say are the must-dos for a firm leader? And if you were advising any firm leader, what has to be done right now?
Well, I think you mentioned a couple of them. Acknowledge the situation, your role, history, and responsibility for the state of our profession. I would say elevate your commitment to this as a core value in leadership and advocacy, and then do a deep dive into your own organization from your demographics, equity, values, and in all aspects of your practice to see where there might be gaps and opportunities to advance through JEDI. And then transparency, number one. You know, we have found, and you know this, Phil, because we've done several firm-wide webcasts, staff, employees, they want to know that we're dealing with this because they're dealing with it on a personal level and a professional level. So I think transparency and acknowledging, you may not have all the answers, but you acknowledge the problem and then move forward. So those are 4 immediate things. I have a whole plan on how you can establish this whole thing, but I think that's the important message. Oh, am I up next?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you describe what paths and tactics a firm should take, and how do they differ for each crisis? In other words, what solutions have been revealed in these disruptions these last couple of months?
Yeah, I think this pandemic situation has been fascinating, and as difficult as it has been, as inconvenient, and the loss of life, you can't estimate that or acknowledge it. On the other hand, it's been fascinating, and to me, one of the most interesting things is that we had to change so quickly, and we proved we could change. So, there were firms that were extremely well prepared and firms that were less well prepared, but all firms adapted extremely rapidly and changed fundamentally in terms of the way they were organized, how they communicated, how they delivered their work. And there was no choice. I mean, there was simply no choice. We had to do it to survive. And yet we did it. And to me, that's a very empowering position. Our firm, our whole industry seemed to be able to figure it out. And anecdotally, and it'd be really interesting to see, Chad, next year when you get your data, but our impression anecdotally is firms not only did it, but they did it without losing much efficiency, without losing much ability to serve our clients, without any significant loss on the quality of our work. I think we'll see how that goes long term. I think there may be some impacts around people and culture that eventually begins to drag our creative potential as our teams maybe struggle to be as creative in a more lonely world. But to me, it's fascinating how we had to change. And I think similarly, when we're dealing with, so that's the public health crisis, and then the economic crisis, we have a similar sort of ability to change. Firms responded, we addressed our staff balance, we addressed changing workflows. And again, these are matters of survival. I think the hardest thing about sustainability and issues around justice and equity, diversity, inclusion is there's a feeling that they can be deferred or postponed. And I think
or an add-on, an overlay.
Or yeah, it's just like, oh yeah, we're going to do that, and we're going to do that in our extra time or whatever. I think that, as I alluded to earlier, with this deep impact on our staff around issues around climate or around justice and equity, if we don't say these are just as urgent as public health, if you don't do it, you're going to die, or if you don't do it, you're going to go out of business. I think we need to find ways to treat environmental and equity issues just as urgently. And again, this message we're going to repeat multiple times, but you have to find your way to do that. But I think if you acknowledge that there's a tendency to begin to let these things sort of slip to the side and not take as rigorously and seriously, then that's a serious risk. So anyway, that to me is the fundamental difference.
Okay. This one may be a little redundant, but your leadership style, from my perspective, is one of a high-level, aspirational, and goal-setting, and direction and vision. So you're not in the weeds, and you do a really good job of leading a very large firm with value and mission. But have you had to alter your style or approach during this time with daily changes and information impacting our lives and our work?
Yes.
If so, what were they?
Yeah. No, I haven't changed at all.
You thought you were going to get away with yes?
Yes. No. Yes. No, I did not think I would get away with yes. To me, I learned a few lessons, and one thing we started doing right when COVID happened was we realized that the communication was going to be an intense need. So I started weekly firm-wide updates to all staff on Fridays, and those were good. Although, as you can imagine, because they were weekly, I did them sort of as I'm doing this now. I spoke from the heart. I spoke sort of impromptu, and I found out. And then I would go back and watch myself, and I would get feedback from people, and I would encourage feedback. And I found out that I wasn't listening as well as I should. I learned that some of my words included implicit bias. I learned that some of the ways I explicitly talked about certain issues revealed that I hadn't really thought through some challenges. So, and we all think that we're sensing aware people, but I learned that I needed to step back and listen better and be more inclusive in my talks and not be so sure. I learned I shouldn't be, in my case, I tend to be overly optimistic, and which means that, hey, we can do this, no problem, let's go do it, sort of a thing. And that optimism tended to make me not to spend enough time to address and acknowledge the problem. And so I was too quick to go to the solution. And so, my advice is to be, listen twice as much as you talk, and in that listening, when you do talk, the first step is to acknowledge the challenges, because that's where the empathy comes in, and then talk about the aspirational position afterwards. And so that's how I've had to adapt in these 6 months. And I think that'll, I hope, keep happening. I think we've all had to adapt in many ways, and I think that needs to continue happening. Am I asking you a question now, or are you asking me another question?
Yep. No, you got it.
I got it. Okay. Well, how about you? Let me ask you this question, because, interestingly, Gabrielle and I both entered our careers thinking we were going to be doing more creative things. I was a painter. Gabrielle wanted to do social housing projects, more socially or creatively motivated. Both of us have ended up being what, let's just call, on the management side of our business. And so, we deal with budgets, and we deal with business planning, and Gabrielle, you shifted into your role around equity, diversity, inclusion, really being a project manager. Before that, you were a director of operations of our Pasadena office when we had that office. And so, it sort of relates to what I was just talking about. How did you have to evolve your own leadership style and the way you comported yourself in the firm in that transition?
Right. Well, I'll talk a little bit about, so that transition was because I became really culturally curious about how we do our work. And it started with working on projects in the Middle East, hospitals, universities, and understanding the cultural uniqueness of working overseas and having to provide a very unique response. And so I thought about the work we were doing here in the States and who was doing the work, who was designing the work. And having been the only one in the room in many, many situations as a Black woman, I really decided that it was time to take that risk to move out of management and into a more leadership role to rally around advancing our profession and our firm. So for me, it was marrying my passion for social justice and for architecture, and how the two are not mutually exclusive.
All right. And in the 7 years you've been doing this, what have you learned that our employees expect? What are our staff looking for from you, or from the leadership of the firm, or maybe just in general in terms of what do they need?
Empathy, guidance, particularly around equity, and fairness, and transparency. So they want to be Third, they want to know that they matter, and they want to know that we are going to continue as a firm with purpose. I have found, I've been with the firm 32 years, and I've noticed more now than ever before a real interest in what the firm stands for. And so I think sticking to that is what they want. They want to know that their values align with the firm's. And right in through here, equity is a big concern for a lot of staff. So guiding them through that and guiding the firm through that, I think, is paramount right now.
And this is not on our list of questions to ask, but I'm gonna ask it anyway.
I knew I was going to get one of those.
It's not that hard. What about our clients? What do our clients expect? Because we're in a service business, so we've got to listen to our clients, and that's sort of job one in any firm is to meet our clients' expectations. How do our clients either have they changed an expectation of us, and how about themselves? Where are they in this JEDI spectrum?
I think they're grappling with how their own organizations grapple with it, but I do think they expect us to lead them through our work to meet those challenges. And so they're looking to us to be their advisor and their leader. I do think that our clients are becoming more diverse and expect us to be the same. So yeah, and particularly in projects like Destination Crenshaw, the client really wanted the team to represent the community. And I think that's going to happen more and more as more investment in urban communities is going to occur. They're going to want that cultural competency and/or representation.
Yeah, and just adding on to my own question, I'll add on to your answer. In general, it seems that our clients are way more diverse than we are as an industry. I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but my impression is the construction industry is relatively diverse, but the design firms, architecture and engineering firms are extremely not so diverse. And engineering firms clearly have gender diversity issues, but both architecture and engineering have race imbalance. And it's easy to step back and say, well, that's because there's fewer people in the design professions that come from diverse backgrounds, or because of work-life balance issues, or technical issues. There's not a natural career for a female engineer to thrive in it, or whatever. And so there's sort of a supply and demand issue. Whereas our clients, if it's a city or a hospital or a university system, they're more likely to have diverse pool of talent to hire from. And to me, if the conversation ends there, it's sort of a cop out. Just because there's not a proportional number of ethnic mix or gender mix in our hiring pool doesn't mean that we can't be diverse. And so it's kind of like you're accepting the status quo, and you're continuing to exacerbate the problem if you continue to just hire the same profile of people. So to me, you have to sort of define a future state, and you have to move towards an end game where we are a reflection of the communities in which we practice. And I think if we're not, our clients will be hiring firms. We're hearing it more and more. The clients want our teams to have similar mix as them. And if we don't, they just don't want to work with us. And so this is kind of like a business imperative. It's a critical issue. And so, and because of the talent pool shortage, we need to be that much more proactive. And so at least for us, we've taken a big push into education through things like ACE mentorship program, funding scholarships at a variety of schools, mentoring and teaching at historically Black colleges and universities, other things. And do you want to add on to that, Gabrielle?
I would just add that, we've been focusing on this for 7 years in a real way. But I think doubling down now is what we've decided to do. And we encourage every other organization to do the same, because it's going to take a long time, right? This is a journey. It's not just a moment, and it requires action. And so not only for your organization, but for the profession, elevate the profession, but also build the pipeline for the future, right? We should not be, we should not lack as much diversity as we do today in the future. And in order to do that, we have to invest in youth, in awareness, recruitment, and turning everything on its head and challenging the status quo. Anything about the status quo that prevents us from advancing, we should examine it.
And then in a minute, we'll shift to answering questions. So if you have questions, go ahead and submit them through the Q&A. But let me just say a few more things. And at the risk of oversimplifying, you know, different modes of progress and different types of diversity, there's different opportunities. At least for architects, for example, we know that more than half of the students going into schools of architecture and interior design are female. And yet, if you look at firm leadership, they're vastly disproportionately. If you look at principals or partners in most firms, they're substantially majority male. I think that means that is a problem that's immediately in our control. And I think that this pandemic is a unique situation where we can address some of those situations. The issues around work-life balance, flexibility of work, the realities of family, having parental leave policies that are for both genders, and now ability to have work flexibility and proving that it's no longer a stigma for someone to be working from home, but in fact everyone is doing it, is you know, all firms should be saying, what can we do to accelerate the promotion and advancement of females in our profession? Race is harder, and I think this this program being part of Zweig's agenda, which is Zweig being fundamentally looking at financial management and the economics of firms. I think the AEC industry suffers from a stigma of being a place where you don't want to work because there's no money in it and there's not good job security. And why would I go through all that educational experience if there's no payback when I could go work for a financial institution or a law firm or something like that? We need to change that. We need to be much more empowered as an industry across the board in AE and C of being a place where the top talent of all ethnicities sees opportunity. Otherwise, we've got a brand problem. You know, if we're always perceived as being on the edge of economic failure, or you know, barely making money, barely able to pay competitive salaries, never paying bonuses, hiring and firing, all that kind of stuff. We need to have pride in our businesses. We need to take our businesses seriously and have a brand that's about thriving. And I think that aligns really well with what Zweig's. Here I am giving Zweig an advertisement. I was not paid to make this message, but anyway.
And then I'll just end with, I mean, we're out of our questions for each other, but I just want to end with, we are visionaries in every other aspect of what we do, and we can be social visionaries. And we can represent the communities that we are serving, because I think we have a duty to do that. And I think we're well positioned to do that if we put our minds to it. So, yeah. Questions?
Good. Do you want to take the first one from Rathi? Do you see the same thing I see?
I think so. Which one is it?
Well, Rathi is saying D&I is still a concept that is not understood. I don't know if we're going to answer it live. And so I think, Gabrielle, you should answer this, because earlier you said D&I is diversity and inclusion is relatively easy, whereas equity and justice is harder. That sounded like you said, oh, no problem, we got that solved.
And I saw that question the minute it came in, and I wanted to address it then. So I didn't mean to imply that it was easy. I was speaking from our perspective. For the last 7 years, it's not been difficult to explore those ideas, the concepts, and why they matter, right? Diversity is the mix, all different perspectives. Inclusion is engaging them and valuing those differences. I think what I was saying is that equity and justice are more difficult to talk about because they're explicitly tied to race, gender discrimination, all the ugly things that people don't want to talk about, all the messy things. So I don't mean to imply that it's easy. D&I is not easy. I would suggest for everybody where it's not commonly understood in your organization that you engage a professional to help you wrap your arms around it. And even though I've been doing this for 7 years, I don't do training. There are experts out there who are really, really very good and expert in the training side of things and exploring some of these concepts. So that would be my recommendation.
And I'll just add on that different parts of the world need to be understood in different ways. This person seems to be from Canada, and diversity and inclusion is totally different in Canada or in parts of Europe or in Asia or Brazil, where we have an office, than it is in New York or LA or Texas. And Gabrielle, you've done these listening tours, and I think all of our studios, or almost all of them, I don't know if you know Brazil yet, but where really you need to start with listening and understanding the cultural issues in a particular place, because you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach, right?
Right, and even in our Canadian offices, we have had those discussions. They may not be the same as in the U.S., but they do exist. So there are similar issues in Canada, and for instance, engaging a Canadian-focused expert is probably the best thing to do.
And it's ironic that in certain places, and I think Canada is one of them, that it's illegal to even classify employees by ethnicity. And so it's, there are other weird issues that you'd think that, that just being able to say, this is our makeup, we can't really do that in some of our Canadian offices. And so we have to think of things in different ways. Okay, let's go on to the next question. And this person is saying, well, this is easy, well and good for Perkins and Will. You're a nationally and globally recognized firm advancing JEDI concept, but what is the first step in diversifying your portfolio for a firm that maybe isn't as doesn't have the resources or the geographic spread or whatever as Perkins and Will? A smaller firm, fewer resources, maybe working more locally. Is this something that can happen everywhere? You want to take that one, Gabrielle?
Yeah, I think it's all scalable, right? And that's why the deep dive and the listening tour of what are the opportunities or challenges that you might have, right? Not every organization has the same challenges. Not all are on a burning platform at the same time. So if recruitment is your issue, if diversifying your staff makeup is an issue because you see gaps where it would help your work or your culture, then focus on that, right? We're focusing on quite a lot because of our size, but you could very easily just pick building the pipeline as a focus. You could just pick recruitment. You could explore cultural competency and how to become culturally competent if you cannot represent a particular culture in your work.
So let me answer this next one about immigration. The question is, and I don't know if they can see the questions, I'll just answer it live. The question is, what is our opinion on immigration as it relates to diversity and inclusion? And I think that we've got a problem in the United States in particular, where our educational policy is totally out of sync with our immigration policy. So the design schools have a lot of international students, and then it's almost impossible for firms to hire those students when they graduate, even though the students want to stay here and are qualified and are some of the best talent. And that's because of the extreme restrictions on H-1B visas. So either the educational institutions should have fewer international students and have people that we can actually hire, or they should relax the H-1B visa program so we can actually hire them. It's just a simple fact that those two things are out of sync. I have a preference for the latter, that we should relax the immigration H-1B visas, because these are extremely productive people in the United States. And we're talking, this is a US question. The same is not the case in Canada or many European countries or elsewhere. And a lot of this goes back to what Gabrielle was talking about when she talked about working internationally on a project. I think our work is better, I think from a creative standpoint, when we bring global perspectives into our work, because someone from Portugal or someone from Shanghai is working in our LA studio. They're looking at problems in different ways. And by the way, we may go back and work in some of those places from our LA studio. So the world is much more mixed. And as long as we're working globally, and as long as we're looking at different perspectives and valuing those perspectives, a higher quotient of diverse geographic backgrounds makes our work higher quality. So that's my opinion. You want to add anything to that, Gabrielle?
No, I think you answered it well, but you're going to have to read them because I can't see without going like this. So.
Okay, fine. This is a good one for you anyway. What are the actual goals of JEDI? Is there a ratio of female or BIPOC?
BIPOC.
Yes.
So yes, early on we understood where our gaps were. For instance, we did not have gender equity. So we did a pay equity analysis across the board. We understood where the gender balance was out of whack in any given discipline or rank. And so we set that as a goal to increase X, more senior designers of women. Similarly, we recognize the gap, the largest demographic gap was at the African-American level, the Black employee level. So we have made a conscious decision to focus on recruiting, mentoring, and looking at current Black staff to make sure that there is a path to advancement, right? And to hire more. So, and it's because it's important, and it's important for our work, and it's important for our culture. So we call it, we need this. And so we're going to work to get that. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, I think you did. And I'm just going to riff on that because something popped into my head that I wanted to talk about that's a little related to what you were just saying, which is sort of biases and so I was talking about creativity, and I think for example, around gender, there are certain biases that men do certain things well and women do other things well. And famously, the former president of my alma mater, Harvard University, Larry Summers, who used to be the head of the US Treasury, famously said that women weren't going to help with STEM jobs or something like that, which is one reason he stopped being the president of Harvard University. That met a lot of furor. But what we found, ironically, is actually almost the exact opposite. Is we found our business, and maybe this will relate more to the business case question that's coming up in a minute, but we found that we were elevating more women into management positions, financial management, business management, operations, and that the firm's performance was at its highest point under the leadership of female leaders in managing director roles or operations roles. And that's not necessarily what you would have expected. And when I speak with my colleagues in engineering firms, there's this classical thing, well, men do engineering, that's why we have so few females. It's just these sort of long-term cultural biases need to get thrown away, and you just need to look at the reality. So we were sort of not surprised, but really gratified that actually our work got better. I would also say that things like boards of directors or management committees that are diverse, they simply function better. So the days of old when a bunch of white guys got in a room and they were telling jokes and inappropriate jokes, those kinds of things, it wasn't that long ago that sort of behavior was okay. All of a sudden you have a diverse boardroom or management partner group, whatever you want to call it, that those teams function at a higher, more elevated level. They act more ethically. They might think they believed in these things, but if they were behaving differently, telling inappropriate jokes at work, their actions didn't line up with their ethics. So it's been now demonstrated that diverse boards have fewer issues around ethics or in public companies, fraud issues, those kinds of things, and the businesses are higher performance. So that's extremely positive. Just conversely, one of our biggest challenges in gender diversity has been with our creative leaders. And you would think that the creative people in our firm are the most inclusive thinkers and therefore the most horizontal thinkers, not the rigid ones that are, but it turns out the creative leaders, and I suppose it has to do with the fact that design leads, are more people where they sort of put their egos on the line. They've had a harder time changing. And so the creative dimension of our profession has been harder to change as quickly, ironically, whereas the management dimension has changed more rapidly. So to me, I'm just saying, we're making progress in areas where we didn't expect, or slower progress in other areas. And so this question about where do you really want to end up, you can kind of define it as you go, so long as you're going, so long as you see the change that's happening.
And as long as you're measuring your progress, right? So if you're not tracking your progress, you won't know when you're achieving it or not achieving it. So we do that as well. Somebody, I think it was Olivia or somebody said, submit the questions through the Q&A.
Yeah, that's what they're doing.
Is that what we're looking at?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
And so this is for you because you said experts can help. So how do you find an expert, Gabrielle? Do they email you and ask?
No, I find them. Oh, email me.
Yeah. Someone listening to this, if they're looking for
email me, and I can give you the names of ones that we have used very successfully. I will say that they are very busy right now. So it might be a little bit more expensive than it was a year ago, but depending on what you want. But there's plenty of resources, and some are free.
Okay.
Email me.
And second last question here is around, can we talk more about the business case for JEDI beyond altruism? Why should firm leaders start making changes? By the way, love your YouTube interviews, Gabrielle.
Oh,
are you trending on YouTube?
I'm doing a vodcast called Breaking the Silence of Design and Having Difficult Conversations with Guests.
All right.
So thank you, whoever said that.
I just said a few things about the business case around JEDI. Do you want to riff on that or add anything?
I think if we're not focusing on JEDI in the work that we do, then what are we designing? Who are we designing for, and who's designing it? And I'm speaking from the architecture part of AEC, of course, because we are in a situation where communities do not reflect the needs or the culture of the people that live there. And I think largely it's because we are designing in a vacuum. We do not represent those communities. We're not operating from a curiosity point of view. We're operating from a presumptive, right? So I think the business case is, depending on what kind of work you do, you're either going to continue to do good work with those clients or you're not. That's been our experience. We do all kinds of projects, and I can't think of one sector that this hasn't come up. Why is your team, not diverse? How come I don't see, I don't see me on your team? That sort of thing. So, there's lots of proof and research that says that the more diverse you are, the more successful you are financially and properly. Same as the board.
And let me add on to that, and of course, everything's changed in the last 6 months, but most of the time, if you ask any business leader, what is their biggest problem? And they're going to talk about talent pipeline, access to talent, recruitment and retention and I think that was on the list of the top 3 items. And if all you're doing is hiring the same demographic over and over again, you continue to shoot yourself in the foot. And there is a tendency for leaders to say, the person who's going to replace me down the road probably should look like me. I'm from this demographic. I went to this school, and I have these, and that's been the pattern over time. Where in essence, and at the same time, productivity in firms is increasing, but salary and salary costs have generally kept up or exceeded productivity improvements. So there's sort of a race. How are you going to deal with that? And so if we restrict the talent pool that we're recruiting from, we're fundamentally shooting ourselves in the foot as businesses. And so both in terms of the quality of the work, but also the financial performance and just the richness of creative richness of what we have as businesses. So I think that's why I'm so excited about the pandemic is the work from home thing, and the fact that this is going to stay with us is going to open up to people that for whatever reason don't want to have a 40-hour-a-week 9 to 5 or 8:30 to 5:30 job. And that's all kinds of people. They might have a medical issue, they might be disabled, they might have kids that they're parenting part-time. Geographic location, we have 25 studios, and someone was talking about earlier, I'm a small firm. Now you can hire someone really anywhere. You can, we're finding our staff have moved to where their parents maybe live, and so they don't have to pay rent, and they're working just as effectively from remote locations. So now we're sort of freed up from this idea of everyone having to be in the same place. All those things and will allow us to have a more diverse workforce, a higher performance workforce, a more satisfied and engaged workforce, and ultimately will drive business success. So I mean, it's most of us are in professional services businesses. That's what we're talking about here, and people make our business, and the better off and happier those people are, the more engaged those people are. That's the ultimate business case. So I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer. I think it's hard to do it. And I don't think you need to, going back to the sort of the notion of quotas and how do you know once you've arrived, I don't think you're necessarily done with this ever. I think that so long as you're making progress and so long as you're open and talking about it and moving in some direction or another, then that's maybe not sufficient is the right word, but that's a positive place to be. And if all firms were doing that, it's going to be sort of a virtuous cycle. It's going to help the whole industry. Okay. Anything else on business case, Gabrielle?
No.
All right.
No,
So the last question we have in the Q&A box is, to effectively create JEDI at a company, it must be embraced by leadership and the principals of the firm. As leaders in your firm, how have you dealt with conflict and lack of alignment between principals and upper management?
I'm going to throw that to you, Phil.
Let's see. I probably sound like I'm struggling with this. I'm just trying to think of the right way to answer. A couple things. One is we've made certain things mandatory. So things that matter should be required. And one of the things was implicit bias training. We had everyone in the firm participate in the same training by an outside trainer over a relatively short period of time. And we made sure that it was a good trainer who was actually, there's nothing worse than bringing in a sexual harassment video that was made in the 1970s and require people to watch that because it's like a joke. And all of a sudden, and we did that about 20 years ago, and that was a total failure. You mandatory video, and you're like, oh, and it turns into, something to make jokes about. But we made sure we had great training around implicit bias. We took it to a higher level, and that was a way to elevate the conversation and the quality, that it was mandatory across the board. I think is one management tactic. The pay equity issue was another mandatory thing. This was working with an outside consultant again, but also training our own human resources staff to objectively and honestly look at pay equity, and not just once, but systematizing pay equity methods into our all of our raises and bonuses cycles, which is annual, or if there are changes over the course of the year. So pay equity was a really important thing because there was the reality, but definitely the perception of pay equity imbalances. And by the way, we did have some, and we've since addressed them, but you can't just address them because then they sort of creep up again. And they went both directions. In some cases, we were underpaying men or women. And so actually there are adjustments actually were about 2/3 women and 1/3 men were adjusted. This was 2 years ago. And so, but we've built it into our annual, and that took some management training and guidance, and it wasn't, again, optional. It was a mandatory thing. I don't feel like we just have anyone out there who's saying, I don't want to do this. I don't believe in this. And I think the hardest thing is the people that say the right thing, but simply just don't follow up. And so then, you have to judge management or leadership based upon their actions, not on their words. So no one's likely to say, hey, I don't support diversity, inclusion, or justice or equity. Of course I do. You have to go back and see what they're doing. And I think, honestly, I don't know that we've really arrived at that point. I like to think that our firm is very aligned in terms of its social ethics and values. I mean, that's part of the brand of our firm. And I think by talking about it more explicitly, even today, for example, we're sort of reinforcing the brand, and that leads, sort of the natural sort of self-selection of people that want to work in our firm are people that have aligned values. But there still is not always aligned performance. And so, it's a work in progress, and we'll get there eventually. But it's much easier to have a diverse workforce, let's say in a city like Los Angeles, which is a super diverse city, than it is a city like Minneapolis, which is not. And I'm sorry if I offended anyone by saying, but that's just our reality, and it may not be the reality in all firms. But what do you think, Gabrielle? Are people aligned, and do you think that we need?
I think we are aligned, and I think how we got folks aligned is with the initial training and discussions to understand what it really is and what the benefit is. You can't just say thou shalt be diverse and get everybody on board without that education and showing the benefits. Our Minneapolis office had a hell of a time finding diverse talent. So they couldn't focus on that particular aspect of our goals. So they started working on the pipeline. So they helped start the local chapter of the National Organization of Minority Architects. So that's why I said, somebody asked before, so what can we do scalable? Well, that's something. And you're helping your own organization and the profession for the future, maybe not for today, because the talent's not in your locale.
Yeah, and so I said that earlier, that, acknowledging the problem, listening, acknowledging, and then coming up with an actionable plan. The way we did it, was we did have firm-wide goals, but we also had very, very local goals. And that's what Gabrielle was referring to with Minneapolis. Each studio in our case had a specific goal around diversity and inclusion. They set the goals, and then we held them accountable to meet the goals that they set themselves. And I think that any organization can do that. As I said, so long as you're you're intentional and you can make progress, then I think that's a positive thing. It's stasis, it's no change, which is just not, that's going to be tone deaf to anyone who you would consider hiring. And we saw that in the data at the beginning of the presentation, in Chad's presentation. The last question here is just, who did we use as a trainer? I can't remember, and Gabrielle probably does. But
so initially we used Helmsley Fraser. So it's an international company. They're excellent. Unfortunately, I just found out yesterday that the particular trainer we used has retired, but Helmsley Fraser is an excellent organization. The first one we used at the very beginning, I don't believe is in business anymore. Recently, we've used Dr. Nika White to help facilitate some discussions around race.
I think, as Gabrielle said, it's a very fluid industry, and I would, network in your local communities and find the right people. I would also find champions within your firms. You very likely have people in your firms who would like to take this on. And even if you say, okay, you're going to spend 20% of your time or 30% of your time for the next 3 years working on this, that's basically how we started. And then that person is given a little bit of budget to go to conferences, to take time to read and study up, and they become your internal champion. You can't rely on outside consultants too much. Outside consultants help in terms of give you sort of a truth setting and an objective analysis around things like pay equity. But if you're really changing your organization, you got to find the change from within, which means finding the champions. And those should be people at leadership level and in the staff level. We've set up a diversity council, which is senior level people all the way down to junior level people, and includes itself as a diverse group, but not only diverse, it has, white men on it all the way, old, young, everything. And that has evolved and rotated, Gabrielle, am I right? Every year we sort of reassess that. And that group is challenged with driving our own agenda. And that's a very easy thing to do. Just create a diversity council, challenge them to come up with a plan that makes sense for you, and then adopt it and take it seriously. So,
and don't let it be a committee. It's got to be paid. It's a paid effort. No committees, no free committees.
Yeah, don't expect them to do this on nights and weekends. Say, this is as important as marketing. This is as important as your IT budget or your benefits or whatever. This is just part of the firm. I think we're at time.
We are at time.
Yeah. And so, Chad, are we supposed to turn off our cameras and microphones?
No. Well, hey, yeah, I just want to thank you both. Everything you said was awesome. So important. I really love how this industry focuses on our history and all of the things in our experience, and how you said we celebrated 75 years, but we look 25 years into the future. And I think that really sets the tone for your company, is how you're leading on JEDI. But man, JEDI is something for every firm. large firms, small firms, we've got to lock arms together on this, and so inspiring. Thank you both for your time. I will say that up next is our ElevateHer symposium. We're kicking it off, and it's actually going to really make the case for some of the things you guys talked about how purpose drives that performance. Firms are worth more. Firms, the financial performance tracks with the things that we're talking about today. So thank you both for your time.